I still remember that dinner table, the clinking of forks against plates, the muted hum of conversation, and the way the air felt heavy as if something unseen was pressing down on me. I had spent most of my life at that very table, a place where my words once carried weight, where my advice was sought, where my stories filled the room with laughter and lessons. But on that evening, when I opened my mouth to share a thought, just a simple thought, it was as though my voice didn't belong there anymore. My daughter's eyes cut across the table, sharp and cold, and her words dropped like ice. "Mom, not now. Please, just let us handle it." It was as if my voice had been shoved back into my throat, swallowed by the silence that followed. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was loud, suffocating, humiliating. My heart began to race as if it were trying to break free from my chest. Heat surged into my cheeks, not from anger but from shame, the kind of shame that burns deeper because it comes from the ones you love most. The laughter around the table continued. Conversations resumed without me, as though I had never spoken, as though I didn't exist. I sat there, my hands trembling against my lap, the weight of invisibility pressing down on me. In that moment, I felt erased, not by strangers, not by outsiders, but by my own family. The very people I had carried, nurtured, and sacrificed for were now treating me like an interruption, like a burden whose words carried no meaning, wanted to disappear under the table, to melt into the floorboards, because the sting of being silenced in your own home, at your own family table, is like being told you don't matter anymore. And the worst part was how normal it seemed to them. My pain was invisible, yet it consumed me whole. I tried to hold my head high, tried to force a small smile so no one would see the storm inside me. But inside, everything cracked. The thought echoed again and again. They don't want to hear me. They don't see me. They don't care if my voice disappears. My chest tightened, my throat closed up, and I realized that this silence wasn't just for that night. It had been creeping in for years, slowly erasing me bit by bit until now. It had claimed me entirely. That night was more than just a dinner. It was a sentence, a declaration that my words no longer had a place in their world. The sound of my fork scraping against the plate felt deafening, each movement reminding me that I was there in body but absent in spirit. My heart begged to speak, to fight, to scream, but my lips stayed pressed together because I already knew. If I spoke again, they would only silence me harder. And that knowledge was more painful than any insult. The memory of that moment still lingers, like an open wound. My family's voices moved around me like a current I could not swim against. They laughed, they planned, they decided, while I sat there, trapped in silence, fighting the urge to vanish. My voice, the same voice that had once soothed their fears and guided their choices, was now treated like a nuisance. And in that room filled with noise, I had never felt so alone. If this story already touched you from the beginning, leave a like now so more people can hear it. Have you ever been silenced when all you wanted was to be heard? My name is Dagny. I'm 78 years old, and once my words were the wisdom this family leaned on. I was the matriarch, the woman whose voice carried through generations, the one they all sought when life grew complicated. My house was more than a roof. It was a gathering place where decisions were made, where quarrels were soothed, where birthdays and holidays blossomed into memories. I was not just part of the family. I was its foundation. My advice was never questioned. My strength was admired, and my love was the thread that tied us all together. I remember nights when my children sat at the table with notebooks, eager to hear how I managed bills, how I raised, then with little, how I faced storms without breaking. My stories of resilience weren't entertainment. They were lessons, reminders that nothing could destroy us if we stayed united. Back then, I was the anchor, the heart, the voice that mattered. But time has a cruel way of testing the soul. The day I lost my husband, the rhythm of my life cracked. He had been my partner for more than 50 years, the man who shared the weight of every decision, every triumph, and every failure. His absence didn't just leave me alone, it stripped me of my shield. With him, I was strong. Without him, I was vulnerable, and little by little, I noticed the shift. At first, it was subtle. Fewer questions directed at me, less interest in my advice. The chair beside me, once filled with his steady presence, sat empty like a constant reminder of what I no longer had. That emptiness echoed through my children's eyes too, though not with sympathy, but with something colder, something that grew bolder as the years passed, where once they asked, "Mum, what do you think?" They now said, "Mum, just don't worry about it." Where once they sat at my feet to listen, they now brushed past me, impatient with my slower steps, irritated by my pauses. The very strength that had built this family was now dismissed as weakness, as a relic of another time. It was as if my voice had an expiration date, and they had decided it had already passed. I had been the center of the table, the spark that kept conversations alive, and now I was treated like the interruption, the one to silence when my words dared to enter their space. The change wasn't overnight. It crept in, hidden under the weight of grief. They began to make decisions without me. First small things. What holiday traditions to keep. What meals to cook. Then bigger things followed. Money matters, home repairs, family disputes. At first, I thought they were protecting me, sparing me from stress, giving me rest in my old age. But soon, I realized it wasn't kindness, it was exclusion. They didn't want my opinion because to them it no longer mattered. They didn't want my guidance because they thought I was outdated. And the worst part? They didn't even notice how much it hurt. I can still see the long dining table where my husband and I used to sit at the head, chairs flanking us like a reminder of our place. Now I am shuffled to the side, often next to the youngest children as though I belong in the corner, out of the way. My seat has been demoted, and with it, my presence. And when I try to join the conversation, when I speak of the past or give a warning from experience, their eyes glaze over, their smiles tighten, and sometimes they don't even respond. The silence is sharper than any insult. It tells me I'm invisible, that my voice has no place. And yet I know what I carried. I know what I built. I know what sacrifices I made, working long hours, holding the family together when everything seemed ready to fall apart. They laugh sometimes when I forget where I put my glasses, but they forget I once kept the accounts of an entire household balanced down to the last cent. They sigh when I ask them to repeat something, but they forget I once listened to their cries at night, their secrets, their dreams, never missing a word. They rush me when I walk slowly, but they forget I once ran to keep them safe, to provide what they needed when the world was cruel. It is cruel, the way memory fades in others, even when yours still burns. They forgot the matriarch, the anchor, the strong woman who never bent under pressure. They only see the old woman now, the one who trembles, the one they think should stay quiet. But inside me, that strength is not gone. It is only buried under the years, under their dismissal, under the shadow of my husband's absence. And as much as they may want to push me aside, as much as they may want to silence me, I am still here. I still see. I still feel. I still matter. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. It was during those dinners that the changes became too obvious to ignore. At first, I told myself I was imagining things, that grief had made me sensitive, that the pauses, the interruptions, the dismissive glances weren't intentional. But little by little, the truth sharpened until it could no longer be denied. My children and their spouses had begun to speak a language where I did not exist. They sat at the same table. the table I had spent my life filling with food, warmth, and stories, and they spoke as though I were not there. Their voices were firm, their tones practical, their words cutting in ways that felt sharper because they were not directed at me, but instead through me, around me, as if I had become air. They would talk about money, about properties, about decisions that once would never have been made without my input. "We'll just sell it. It doesn't make sense to keep holding on," one of them said, and I froze, realizing they were discussing the land that my husband and I had bought together with decades of sacrifice. Another added, "She doesn't need to be bothered with all of this. It's not like she'll understand the numbers anyway." The words fell like stones, not because they questioned my ability, but because they made it clear. I was no longer part of the circle. I was a burden to protect themselves from, an inconvenience, a shadow. At dinner, I would open my mouth to speak, to share something, even something small like a memory that tied to what they were discussing. "When your father and I began once, but before I could finish, my son raised his hand lightly and said, 'Mum, let's not complicate things right now.' Just like that, silenced, dismissed, erased in front of everyone. The food on my plate turned to dust in my mouth. My voice, once respected, was now an interruption they tolerated. Their eyes moved past me as if I were part of the furniture, something that occupied space but no longer contributed to the room. What hurt the most was not their coldness. It was the silence of the little ones, the grandchildren I had rocked to sleep, fed with my own hands, carried on my back when they were too tired to walk. They sat there, their eyes flickering between me and their parents, confused maybe, but silent. They didn't speak up when I was cut off, didn't defend me when laughter rose at my expense, didn't say, "Let Grandma finish." And I knew they were learning a lesson in those moments, a lesson about value, about respect, about how the old are treated when they're no longer useful. That silence weighed heavier on me than any cruel word could have, because it told me they had accepted this new order, where I was irrelevant, where I was fading in real time before their very eyes. Sometimes I wondered if I was going mad, if perhaps I had indeed lost all value and didn't realize it. After all, that is how they made me feel. Like a relic that should sit quietly, unseen, unheard, waiting for time to finish what they had already started. Erasing me. The rooms of my own house echoed with their voices, but none of them were for me anymore. They spoke about the future as if I had no part in it. As if my years of building this family had been nothing but a temporary assignment that had now expired. And yet, in those moments, anger stirred under the sorrow. I looked at their faces, at the dismissive nods, at the way they took decisions, over the food I had cooked with my own hands, and I thought, do they not realize? Do they not remember? Every chair at this table exists because I fought for it. Every mouth they feed is here because I endured hunger to make sure they had enough. Every laugh, every roof, every piece of security they enjoy exists because I spent decades bleeding myself dry to give them more than I ever had. And now they dare to look at me as if I am nothing. I began to dread the meals, not because of the food, but because of the humiliation that came with them. To sit there day after day, invisible, ignored, cut off, this was worse than any loneliness. It was rejection while surrounded by the very people I had given my life to. And I could feel something dying inside me each time I swallowed my words, each time I forced myself to stay quiet, each time I accepted that I was no longer allowed to speak at the table where I had once been the queen. Do you think silence can sometimes wound deeper than cruel words? The moment that still burns inside me happened on a night that was supposed to be ordinary. Dinner was set as it always was, with the plates aligned, the glasses shining under the kitchen light, the smell of roasted chicken filling the air. I had seasoned it with the same care I always had, hoping, maybe foolishly, that food could be the bridge back to warmth, back to respect. For years, meals had been the stage where our family bonded, where laughter and conversation danced together. But on that night, the table became the stage of my humiliation. I had only wanted to share a story, a memory from long ago, about the time when their father and I were newly married and struggled through winters, with little more than bread and hope. I opened my mouth gently, waiting for a pause in their chatter, and began, "When your father and I first—" But before I could finish, my daughter-in-law's voice sliced the air. "There she goes again," she said loudly, her tone sharp and dripping with mockery. "Always talking too much about things no one cares about anymore." The words hit harder than any slap. My fork slipped from my hand and clattered against the plate, the sound echoing in the room like a bell tolling for the last piece of dignity I had left. I looked around, waiting, hoping that someone would defend me, that someone would say, "Let her finish, she deserves to speak." But instead, laughter broke out, quick, harsh, like glass shattering. My son lowered his head, pretending to focus on his food, unwilling to challenge his wife. My grandchildren snickered softly, eyes darting away when mine filled with tears. The pain was not only in the insult itself, but in how easily everyone accepted it, how effortlessly they turned my attempt to share into entertainment. Then, as if one cruelty wasn't enough, another voice joined in, my own eldest daughter. "Oh, come on, Mom," she said, her tone both dismissive and impatient. "You don't understand half of what we're talking about these days. Just let us handle it." Her words, wrapped in false practicality, fell on me heavier than any weight I could carry. It wasn't just that they silenced me, it was that they erased me, declaring before everyone that I no longer had value, that my years of wisdom, my decades of sacrifice had expired like spoiled food. I felt the heat rise to my face. My chest tightened, and for a moment I thought I couldn't breathe. The food I had prepared, the table I had set, the very home I had built with my husband, all of it had become the setting where I was stripped of dignity. Their cold laughter wasn't just noise, it was a hammer breaking what was left of me into pieces too small to gather again. In that moment, I wasn't their mother, their grandmother, their matriarch. I was just an old woman, mocked and dismissed, a character in a cruel play where my role was to be laughed at. The betrayal in that room was suffocating. I had given them everything, and still, they gave me ridicule. I had once been the reason this family survived, and now I was reduced to a punchline. I stared at my plate, unable to look at their faces any longer. My hands shook as I tried to steady my fork, but I couldn't bring myself to take another bite. The laughter still echoed, the sting of their words replaying in my mind over and over. I wanted to scream, to demand that they remember who I was, what I had done. But the weight of their indifference pressed down too heavily. The silence I forced upon myself that night wasn't from weakness, it was from realizing that no matter what I said, they had already decided I didn't matter. Yet deep inside, beneath the pain, a fire flickered. They thought their words had silenced me forever. But humiliation has a way of planting seeds. Seeds of anger, of determination, of a resolve to prove that dignity doesn't vanish just because others fail to see it. Their cruelty carved something inside me that I didn't yet understand, but that would grow stronger with every insult, every laugh, every time they tried to erase me. Because the truth is, humiliation can only bury someone if they agree to stay in the dirt. And while that night I stayed quiet, my silence wasn't surrender. It was the gathering of strength for the moment when I would no longer allow them to laugh at me. If you believe no one deserves to be humiliated inside their own family, subscribe now for more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, if you were in my place, would you stay silent to keep peace? Or would you rise against the humiliation no matter the cost? After the laughter had died down and the table once again filled with the clinking of forks against porcelain, I sat there in silence, shrinking into myself as though the chair could swallow me whole. My heart was heavy, my eyes burning, but I forced them downward, staring at the plate of food that had once been a symbol of love and unity and now tasted like ash. Everyone went on with their conversations as if nothing had happened, as if my humiliation had been a momentary joke, a passing amusement unworthy of thought. But there was one pair of eyes that didn't look away. Across the table, my youngest grandson was watching me. His face was still soft with youth, but there was a sharpness in his gaze, a quiet defiance that none of the others carried. I could feel it, the way his eyes lingered on me longer than anyone else's, as though he was trying to understand the weight I carried. He didn't laugh, he didn't mock. Instead, his brows furrowed just slightly, and when our eyes met, he didn't look away like the others. He held my gaze, steady and unafraid, as if silently telling me, "I see you." It was a simple thing, that look, but it carried more warmth than all the years of cold shoulders and cutting words combined. My chest tightened with a different kind of ache, one I hadn't felt in a long time, the ache of hope. I lowered my eyes quickly, ashamed of the tears, gathering there. But beneath the table, something else happened. A small hand slid across and found mine. His fingers wrapped around mine, squeezing firmly, anchoring me in a storm I thought I was destined to weather alone. The room didn't notice. They were too busy with their shallow chatter. But I noticed. For the first time in years, someone chose to reach for me. I wanted to say something, anything, but words failed me. My voice had been buried under layers of shame and silence for so long that speaking felt impossible. Yet I didn't need words. His hand in mine was enough. That small, quiet rebellion against the indifference of everyone else at the table was louder than any insult they had ever thrown at me. When the serving dish came around again, he didn't pass it over me the way the others usually did, pretending I wasn't even sitting there. Instead, he lifted the spoon carefully, scooped a generous portion, and placed it gently onto my plate. He looked up at me with the faintest smile, a smile that seemed to whisper, "You still matter. I see you. You are not invisible." My throat tightened as I nodded at him, too overcome with emotion to say thank you. But in that moment, I didn't need to speak. He already understood. It might seem like nothing to those who have never felt erased. A look, a hand, a plate of food. But when the world conspires to strip you of dignity, these small gestures feel like revolutions. In that dining room, where my voice had been muted and my presence mocked, one boy's quiet defiance became a flame. And inside me, something began to stir. I had spent so long believing the cruel chorus around me that I forgot what it felt like to be seen. My grandson's actions reminded me that my story was not yet finished, that there was still someone willing to listen, someone willing to stand when everyone else sat in silence. Later that evening, when the noise of the family filled the air with careless talk, he leaned closer and whispered so only I could hear. "I hear you, Grandma." 4 words. Just 4. But they carried more weight than entire speeches of mockery. Those words wrapped around me like a shield, giving me back a piece of myself I thought had been stolen forever. I sat taller after that. My hands no longer trembled when I reached for my glass. My voice didn't yet return, but my spirit lifted. I realized that even when the majority chooses to trample you down, the presence of just one ally can remind you of who you are. And for me, that ally came in the form of a boy too young to fully grasp the wars fought around a family table, yet brave enough to reach across it when no one else dared. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel erased. I didn't feel invisible. I felt the stirrings of something stronger, something alive. Dignity. because dignity isn't only given, it can be restored piece by piece by those who have the courage to see you when others choose to laugh. Have you ever been defended by someone when you least expected it? Tell me in the comments. I want to know how that moment changed you. The night of that dinner will remain etched in my memory forever, not because of the cruelty that came before, but because of the moment the silence finally shattered. I had grown used to swallowing words, letting them wither before they reached my lips, because every time I tried to speak, someone was quick to cut me off, quick to remind me that my age made me irrelevant. Yet in that suffocating atmosphere, it wasn't me who found the strength to break through. It was my grandson. The youngest at the table, the one they thought too quiet to matter, rose like a spark that turned into a fire. I remember the exact moment. My daughter-in-law made a dismissive remark, laughing as if the years I had spent building this family were nothing but dust under her shoes. My son said nothing, too concerned with saving face. My fork clinked against the plate as my hand trembled, and I lowered my gaze, ready to endure yet another evening of being erased. But before the shame could sink its claws deeper into me, his chair scraped against the floor. The sound cut through the chatter like thunder. Heads turned, and there he stood, my grandson, his eyes blazing, his voice steady in a way I had never heard before. Stop silencing her. She has a voice, and it matters. The room froze. The laughter died in their throats, hanging in the air like smoke from a fire just extinguished. For a moment, no one knew what to do. They had never been challenged like this, not by someone they thought was too young, too insignificant to stand against them. But he didn't falter. He pressed on, his hands gripping the back of his chair as though anchoring himself in the storm. She's the reason we are all here. Every memory you cherish, every roof over your heads, every tradition you claim as your own, it all began with her. And yet you sit here, mocking, silencing, erasing. Enough. My chest swelled with a mix of disbelief and pride. My voice had been buried for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to be defended. Tears blurred my vision as I watched him reach into his pocket and unfold something. He laid it flat on the table, an old photograph. In it I was younger, holding 3 small children on my lap, my arms wrapped tight around them, my face radiant with the exhaustion and love only a mother could carry. "Do you see this?" he demanded, holding it up for everyone to see. "This is her, the woman who gave her life so you could sit here today. The woman who worked, sacrificed, and prayed so this family could exist. How dare you laugh at her pain?" Gasps broke out around the table. My daughter-in-law shifted uncomfortably, her smirk gone. My son's face flushed red, torn between anger and shame. My grandson didn't stop there. He pulled out another photo, me at the factory gates covered in dust and sweat, smiling, because the wages I earned would put food on their plates. Then a worn letter, one I had written years ago to encourage him during his exams, filled with words of love and belief in his future. He placed them in front of everyone like evidence in a trial. "She's not useless," he said firmly. "She's not too old. She's not someone to be silenced. She is the backbone of his family, and you will not treat her otherwise, not while I am here." The silence that followed was heavy. Not the suffocating kind that comes from indifference, but the kind born of guilt. No one dared meet my eyes, and for the first time in years, that silence did not crush me. It lifted me. Because through his voice, I heard mine. Every insult I had swallowed, every humiliation I had endured, was being burned away by the fire of his defense. My hands, once trembling, steadied on the table. My back straightened. I didn't speak. Not yet, but I didn't need to. My grandson's words echoed louder than anything I could have said. And in that moment, the weight of years, of erasure began to crumble. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. I felt alive. If this moment of justice made your heart beat faster, click like so this story can reach even more people. And tell me, if you were in my place, how would you have felt hearing someone finally raise their voice for you? When the storm of that night began to settle, something inside me had already shifted. For years, I had carried the silence like a burden tied around my throat, heavy chains that dragged me into shadows even as I sat in the middle of my own family. They had pushed me aside, treated my words as interruptions, my presence as an inconvenience, my pain as amusement. I had convinced myself that perhaps this was the natural order of things, that with age came erasure, that respect had an expiration date. But in that moment, when my grandson's voice rose above the laughter and cut through the cruelty, I realized that silence was not my destiny. I didn't stand and shout. I didn't throw plates or demand apologies. I didn't need to. My decision came quietly, the way most powerful decisions do, in the stillness of my heart, in the calm after the storm. That night, as I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, I whispered to myself words I hadn't dared to believe for so long. I matter. Those two words, so small yet so mighty, spread through my chest like fire, warming places I thought were long dead. I thought of all the sacrifices I had made, the nights I worked my hands, raw, to feed mouths that never went hungry, the years I stitched torn clothes so they could stand tall in front of others, the love I poured into every corner of this family, even when none was returned. I had given everything without ever expecting repayment. But now I understood. Legacy is not built on who laughs the loudest or who controls the table. Legacy is built on who protects the truth, who honors the past, who refuses to let silence bury the voices that once carried everything. And so I made a choice. It wasn't one I would announce. There would be no speeches, no confrontations, no dramatic declarations. My choice was etched in silence, but this time it was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of power. I decided that everything I had, my small savings, the little house that still carried the scent of the man I once loved, the few treasures I had held onto from a lifetime of labor, would not go to those who tried to erase me. It would go to the one who stood, the one who raised his voice when mine had been stolen, the one who reminded me that dignity has no expiration date. Peace washed over me with that decision. It wasn't revenge, though some might call it that. It was recognition. A reward not for bloodline, but for loyalty. Not for age or entitlement, but for courage. My grandson would inherit not only what I had to give in material things, but the story of that night, the memory of the moment. He gave me back my voice. That would be my true legacy. In the days that followed, I noticed subtle shifts. My son avoided my gaze, ashamed. My daughter-in-law bit her tongue, her sharp words suddenly dulled. The others sat quieter at the table, as if realizing that laughter can cut deeper than knives. But it didn't matter whether their shame lasted or faded. I no longer waited for their validation. I no longer begged for space to speak. Because I knew that even if every voice around me tried to drown me out, mine had already found a way to live again, through the one who stood by my side. Sometimes people believe that age strips you of choices, that you are doomed to accept whatever scraps of respect are handed your way. But that night proved otherwise. Even when your voice shakes, even when your years are heavy, you still have power. The power to decide who deserves your trust, your love, your legacy. And now I turn the question to you. And you, in my place, would you forgive those who silenced you? Or would you give everything to the one who gave you back your voice? If stories like this make you reflect on family and justice, subscribe now so you won't miss the next one. They tried to silence me, but his voice became mine. There are moments in life when silence feels heavier than any stone, when the laughter of others cuts sharper than a blade, when the weight of invisibility threatens to crush the very soul. For so long, I believed that enduring quietly was the only option, that dignity meant swallowing pain with a bowed head and a steady smile. But the truth is that dignity has nothing to do with being silent. It has everything to do with remembering that no matter how many years pass, no matter how frail the body becomes, the spirit within us was never meant to be erased. Faith carried me through those dark nights. Faith that somewhere, someone still saw me. Faith that God does not let the truth remain buried forever. Every prayer I whispered in solitude was heard. Every tear that fell unseen was counted. And when the moment finally came, when my grandson stood tall in my defense, I understood that prayers are never wasted. They might take years to be answered. They might come from unexpected places, but they always arrive at the right time. There is something sacred in being reminded that your voice still matters. For years, I thought mine had been taken away. I sat at the table like a shadow, present but unseen, breathing but unheard. Yet God, in His infinite wisdom, raised another voice when mine could no longer rise. Through my grandson, my words lived again. My worth was proclaimed again. My story was acknowledged again. And in that moment, I remembered that no family can erase the truth. No laughter can bury it. No cruelty can silence it forever. Life often teaches us through pain, but it also heals us through small acts of courage. The courage of a young man who dared to speak when silence was easier. The courage to choose love over fear. The courage to stand by those who are pushed aside. That is what transforms generations. That is what breaks cycles of cruelty and replaces them with legacies of justice. To anyone listening now, I want you to hold this close. Your value does not expire. No matter your age, no matter how many voices try to diminish you, no matter how alone you may feel, your worth is not defined by their laughter. It is defined by the life you've lived, the sacrifices you've made, the love you've given, and the truth you've carried. And even if the world tries to drown you out, someone will hear you. Maybe a grandchild, maybe a friend, maybe a stranger passing through your life. But someone will see the strength in you and remind you that you are still here and you are still powerful. Forgiveness is a question only the heart can answer. Some may choose it, others may not. But what matters most is never forgetting who you are and never surrendering your dignity to the cruelty of others. Justice has many forms. Sometimes it is loud, sometimes it is quiet, but it always comes, and when it does, it restores more than words. It restores hope. So let this be more than just a story. Let it be a reminder that your silence does not define you and that your truth is stronger than fear. Carry that truth with courage and let it guide the choices you make from this day forward. If this moment of justice made your heart beat faster, click, like so more people can be touched by stories like this. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story will go even deeper, revealing how a single decision can change everything a family thought they knew. You won't want to miss what comes next.